Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here at Denver.
Oh, hey man, how's it going?
What's up, man? Look, why don't you? I already know what I want to talk about, but for everybody out there listening, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody out there?
Yeah, I'm an author. I write books about cryptozoology, paranormal topics. You name it. If it's weird, I've probably wrote a book about it somewhere along the line.
Do you try and stay kind of within the realms of what a lot of people talk about? Like when it comes to, I know everybody loves Bigfoot. Everybody loves, right now it's UFOs like crazy.
Yeah.
But I like the side ones that not a lot of people get to really understand and talk about. Like I have a buddy who talks about Atlantis, as much of a big one as that might be, but it doesn't, besides a couple of books and people mention it here or there, or maybe Jason Momoa sparked up its interest of times, it really doesn't get talked about it thoroughly, deeply, I guess only because there's not really a lot of evidence. But despite who you talk to, there are some people that are like, there's evidence everywhere you look. I'm like, all right,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, like when I first started writing, and my first book was actually about lake monsters, and the reason I wrote that one was because at the time, and there were a lot of good lake monster books, 6, 7, 10 years before that. But at the time that I wrote that book, there weren't really a lot of newer ones out there. And I felt that Bigfoot, of course, is always popular and all that. But there's just so many. I guess the market is kind of saturated with at the time with the Bigfoot book. So I've kind of tried to kind of write the books that I want to read at the time. So like you said, some of these subjects are overlooked in a sense. I wrote a book about giants. I've wrote two lake monster books and things like that. So I kind of try to hit those topics that aren't necessarily covered a whole lot sometimes.
Which, if you had to pick out of either cryptozoology or lost civilizations, like that's a probably a whole nother topic in itself. But if you had to pick one out of either of those that you particularly find fascinated with, or probably the most about, which would it be?
Well, I would think probably I guess it depends like where I'm at the time. I kind of go back and forth. Probably cryptozoology as far as like the lost civilizations go. I mean, I'm not really like into Egypt and
Yeah.
things like that so much. I would say I'm more and like an enthusiast for ancient mysteries, I guess might even be a better way of putting it. Like and a lot of the things that goes along with that, such as giants, those sort of things. I'm not really as into the you got a lot of people that write and study like the megalithic structures, that sort of thing. I mean, I've visited some of those sites, but I haven't had a chance to visit as many of them as I would like to.
Well, why don't you pick a crypto or something that, like, because I know everyone, I live near Virginia, so the Mothman
Okay.
usually gets brought up when people talk about Virginia, or if you want to talk about Jersey,
Yeah.
there's the New Jersey Devil. I didn't know Pennsylvania had one. It's called the Pope Licking Monster, which like lives on a bridge, and it's the only cryptid apparently from what they've talked about. It has like a high death count, and everyone's like, "What are they cryptids killing people?" No, it's because it's on a bridge, and sadly, this bridge gets used a lot by trains and
Yeah.
there's nowhere to go when a train's coming. So basically, people have to jump off or hold on to the bridge. Like a dude lost his arm, and I'm like, what about the missing link? Like that gets referenced in so many movies, but I don't see anybody like really deep diving into it.
Well, you get that a lot with a lot of these cryptids and things. I mean, you get a lot of it is I think a lot of this stuff, gets more urban legend and
Yeah.
things like that. And then like you said, you get people that go out to a lot of these sites where these things have supposedly been spotted, or where a lot of the stories and things take place. And investigators, like you said, people are out walking around on bridges and dangerous places. And a lot of these people that go into these abandoned these abandoned buildings and things like that. You know, there's a lot of danger in itself right there, just going out and investigating.
I think though, like when we talk about the market being saturated, I think that's kind of what dismisses a lot of this stuff too, especially with UFOs. We're starting to see more documentaries and things of that sort being tossed out, and a lot of people are diving into it. It's just so hard to find someone that like when you talk about like, all right, what kind of cryptos are you into? And they go like, well, Bigfoot, and it's like, okay, well, then they reference like for me, I would only be able to reference a couple Bigfoot documentaries or shows that are on Netflix because I just haven't really researched into it. But then when you get someone that tosses out something that you're like, never heard of giants before, and they like know stuff about giants, I'm like, okay, now I'm interested because a lot of this stuff gets chalked up to myth. It's kind of like the 9/11 truther thing. Like, I
Hmm.
don't like that name in the whole because if they're called conspiracy theorists and then they have truther in their name, you're not really doing your whole entire idea a kind of a good effort to it because you're saying truther, which means you have the definitive answer. I rather just want to talk to someone that knows their shit about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, anytime, and with all these topics, I mean, even like these cryptozoology or UFO, whatever you want to call it. I mean, people that set themselves up as experts, like take Bigfoot for instance. You have all these people that are, I mean, come across or claim to be experts, but I don't think you can really be an expert in something that's not proven to exist yet, if you know
There's
what I
people
mean.
selling hair online. It's kind of like
Yeah.
Roswell, New Mexico. There's they if you go there, there's just everything is littered with just UFO stuff. Everything is
Yeah.
UFO related, and that's like their town. It's kind of like where the Loch Ness monster was found. Everything's Nessie, and it's like
Hmm.
you guys are just kind of beating the myth to a point where you can just get money out of it, which I'm just like, I'm not mad at if somebody wants to like
Yeah.
create like merch on it and everything like that. Sure. But I want to also know like this because I'm fascinated if there was, because there's things we can't explain. I'm always seeing a documentary or something like the Dino Fish on Netflix was a documentary about how they found a 600 million year old fish that was off the coast of Africa because dynamite fishermen were blowing up its home and it caused this fish that they thought was dead to like float up to the top and people were selling it at markets. I'm like, okay, so
Wow.
what are we talking about? Chupacabra. They say it's a hyena with mange. I'm like, but where did that stem from? I know it gets stories and passed down, but I kind of want to
Yeah.
know what that real stuff is.
Yeah, and like you said there with chupacabra, I mean the way that I don't even understand some of the 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 reports of chupacabra where it's more like the dog like creature that looks all mangy and everything. I mean, as far as I understood it up until fairly recently, the chupacabra was more like a creature with red eyes that had like a spiky back and almost like a cross between like a kind of like hop like a kangaroo
Yeah.
sort of thing. It almost sounded more, maybe even more metaphysical, really, than an actual, cryptid or like an undiscovered animal. But now, some way that these blue dogs, these hairless dogs, or whatever you want to call them down in Texas, or that's got associated into the chupacabra thing, and I don't really know where and when and how all that happened, but it's just kind of the way that this stuff goes.
I think it got littered probably with a lot of kids my generation that were coming up because a giant spark of a lot of people like myself interested in these topics came from Slenderman. I mean, that was a thing that was
Okay.
created on a creepy pasta forum of just
Yeah.
random internet trolls creating and making a story of a character that they turned into a video game where people are like, you search up Slenderman, there's results below it that show you missing link. They show you other types of cryptids and monsters, and that's I think we all have heard the story of like Loch Ness monster. We've all seen Scooby Doo cartoons of that type of
Yeah.
stuff. But I really, I man, it makes you want to explore one of these places and just be like, okay, like I had my Egyptology friend on here, and I was telling him, I was like, all right, so the theory behind it is that the people were actually the size of giants. That's why they were able to lift up the pyramid piece. He goes, no, no, no. I'm like, all right, I get it. Shut me down. But at the same time, you understand, like that's a story that was created that actually it holds some weight a little bit too if you're trying to understand how these giant obelisks were created to build this giant pyramid.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and you look at some of those pyramids or other stone structures, but some of those blocks are so big, I don't know if even like a giant would be able to lift it. But nevertheless, like a lot of your your legends and things like indigenous legends, I want to say, have giants associated with pyramids or with large stone structures, things like that. So it makes you wonder if there might be a little something to it.
It was recently I was watching a documentary about there's people with horns, like legit actual horns that come out,
Yeah.
and they actually get like people back in the day used to persecute them and consider them witches or people that were trying to summoning the devil because they would get this horn growth coming out of their head. Now it's a natural growth that people actually develop. It's a calcium deposit, basically like how we get if you eat too much calcium, your fingernails, the tips of them, they'll start to get white, and that's where the calcium will start to go towards. Now, people are growing like bones out of their head, and the most famous account is a woman who had one horn that came out like a giant goat that actually curved
Yeah.
around. It was so long that she had to actually hold up because it would drag her whole head down. And I'm like, bruh, man, you got to tell me there's some people out there that have like there's a picture of a dude that had a one horn that was like Hellboy kind of, like one was shaved down and the other one was out. And I was like, this is where we get the stories from, is some person's taking peyote in the middle of the desert and then they see somebody that starts with a horn. I'd be freaked out too, even if I wasn't taking a drug.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been I've seen pictures of a couple of skulls like you're talking about that actually, like, just out the top you got these like two little nubby things right there. And sometimes those get kind of intermingled with some of the giant stories and things like that. And with your giant stories you get a lot of the reports, and even like in old newspapers and things, where these massive skulls were found, and like the jawbone would have double rows of teeth, and that's actually quite prevalent. And I don't really know quite how to explain the double rows of teeth, but there's
There's an
certainly a lot of the stories out there with that.
there's an MMA fighter who he was getting, like, a doctor was checking him over before he was going into a fight, and they were like, "Where did you find this person?" He's from the Congo, and they're like, "Well, he's from the Congo," and he goes, "This person has facial muscles that I've never seen before. Like there's just
Wow.
extra muscles in there," and I'm like, it's obviously like there's some people that have like maybe like they have an extra toe or an extra finger, and this might be a category of that, but just in a different manner. But what I get fascinated with is the legends and the folklore that comes behind it. Like the New Jersey Devil is one I know prominently because they had that show, The X Files or whatever it was back in the day. And I remember it gave me
Yeah.
fucking nightmares because I was a kid watching it. And they
Uh-huh.
talk about a half goat, half human thing come out of this lady when she's giving birth and fly up a chimney and fly out. I'm like, I don't know where that legend came from, but somebody saw something they couldn't explain. And that's why we get Jeepers Creepers and we get all these types of movies that started prophetizing it and then really turning into this whole thing, which I enjoy the stories. I like the stories of the Yeti, even though the origin of that comes from parents trying to scare their kids, saying if you don't eat your vegetables or if you don't go to bed and you come out of your room, the Yeti will take you and kidnap you. And
Hmm.
but then there's Sherpas that have been knocked off mountains by hit by giant boulders. And I don't know if that's from an avalanche or they talk about a Yeti doing it. And I'm like, is it just like how we, like, some people like to say, well, it was just because God wanted it that way? Is that what it is? Because I don't see a Yeti being like, why would he just toss a boulder at a random Sherpa?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really weird. And some of these stories like you're talking about with the Jersey Devil, how that came to be. I mean, I've read some stuff about it that that there was kind of like a feud between some families back then. And the Leeds, it was originally called the Leeds Devil. And from what I've read, like they produced an almanac that was competing with another almanac back then, and they sort of got demonized, if you will. And I think the what am I trying to call it? The crest, or whatever you want to call it, the family crest or something, had like the little wings, and kind of like how the Jersey Devil supposedly has wings, and I don't know if it kind of like originated there, and after time, this and that and whatever gets thrown in. But the weird thing about that kind of stuff for me is, even if some of these stories of creatures have these sketchy beginnings like that, you still have, credible people that supposedly, have sightings of these things. And that's what really blows my mind about it all.
I think it's those people that I would call them like kind of like a monkey wrench. Not that they're against or messing up the system, but like there's so many accounts with the UFO stuff where like there's pilots, like expert flight pilots that fly things that you need like top level clearance to do that talk about that the earth is flat. And I'm like, I don't know what to believe anymore. Like at this point, I'm over here sitting in the corner, like, man, I'm just gonna wait and hope that someone figures all this out for me and puts it on like a Reddit space somewhere. But that's what I find interesting is that there are people who are very credible
Yeah.
sources that don't believe or they do believe this certain thing or they turn it this way. And I think especially like I think with like your books, for instance, are you now when you research these types of things and you put when you are making a story for your book, do you make it your own based on actual stuff that you can read accounts of, or do you also like I obviously use like as a source, but you're more creating your own story within it. You're not just like maybe journalistically reposing an article and then putting it back up.
Yeah, right. Use the former there, like I'll kind of tell the tale, right? And I'll find as many sightings as I can, maybe pull some of the best of those to kind of retell it. I'm not I don't kind of like verbatim, put a sighting or whatever you have out there. Maybe sometimes like if I find like a cool old newspaper clip or something like that, I might
Yeah.
put that out there like as an example, and then I'll try, if I can, to add some recent stuff, or if someone and people do all the time, they'll contact me through my website on the contact form, and they'll tell me of things that they've spotted, or just weird encounters that they've had. Sometimes I'll include those where they might fit in a story I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, the reason why I say that was because there's people that will go like onto a cryptozoology site just to use like to if they're gonna make a Bigfoot character, they would just look at accounts and things that they would do and then put the Bigfoot in a different scenario. But then I think what you're trying to say is
Mhm.
that you look at the report and then you do the report, but you also kind of like look at it and you kind of to refresh it into everybody's mind. Because if you're asking someone to look back at a report from 1970 something, nobody's going to know what that is and they're going to care. We want it more
Yeah.
modernized to be able to fit for us now.
Yeah, that's basically, and then I'll kind of and then a lot of the the things I write about, I might give my personal opinion on it, or like a lot of times you'll have some reports that seem kind of hokey, so I'll be like, this is a supposed sighting, but I don't know. It seems kind of weird. I'll give my opinion on that, or sometimes you'll know that some of your good sightings or this or that, whatever it may be, is been proven to be a hoax. So sometimes I'll include that kind of stuff to show you know some of the hoaxes that have gone along with it. It just because there's a lot of like hoaxed reports out there,
Yeah.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of the other reports aren't credible. You just I kind of like to let the reader decide, what they
Yeah.
think about stuff. I take a big approach in my books. You'll see me say I don't know a lot. because this stuff is just so weird a lot of times that for me, I try to keep an open mind, not draw too rigid of conclusions about a lot of these things.
I think that's very, very important because I think what we all always like the Bigfoot documentary. I don't know if you saw on Netflix. I thought it was going to be something like credible and real about Bigfoot, but
Which
then
one are you talking about?
the newest one that came out, it was like Sasquatch or something.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I've seen so many of them. It's so
I
hard to
wouldn't
tell.
recommend the new one because the new one it made you think that this was going to be a real legitimate documentary about Bigfoot where I was like, thank God we're in 2021 and every fucking video I see of Bigfoot is a shitty ass phone camera and then they drop it when Bigfoot shows up and then they pull it back up. He's gone. I'm like, what? But when I was watching this, the first two episodes of the 5 episode series or whatever it is like a dude telling you about here are my giant nugs of weed when I was on my weed farm at 3 a.m. I saw this creature. And then you just start going, and I'm like, oh, why did they have to spend 2 episodes introducing weed? It doesn't make sense. It's now you're discrediting everything that could be, and then it turns out to be a serial killer named Bigfoot that chopped up some people. And I'm like, well, what the hell? Like, this is why people don't take anything seriously about this stuff, is because the people that actually want to report about this stuff or talk about this stuff, I researched into the Bigfoot stuff. There's a lot of fake sites online that just sell Bigfoot hair. There's communities
Hmm.
of people where I'm looking at them talk about it and I'm watching interviews with them. And I'm like, these people actually give a shit about trying to find out if there is something like this out there. And they always bring up the trees and, that's how Bigfoot can hide. But I'm like, I want to hear and talk to someone. And that's my whole thing too. As much as you're open minded, I'm open minded too. If someone tells me the earth is flat, I want to hear why and how and what they think about it. I would never discern anybody's beliefs, but when you have accounts of aliens and then the UAP report being released and all these accounts, I'm like, fuck, I want to hear someone talk about it, but not do it in a dumbass Netflix documentary that makes fun of it the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just how this that's just kind of how this stuff goes. I mean, for every good book or a good documentary, you probably have like 10 bad ones. It's just kind of, I don't really consume a whole lot of the documentaries or TV shows like I used to. And that's kind of as I've got more into writing books and knowing or having knowledge of a lot of the people in this stuff, I'm just kind of like, I just don't consume a whole lot of it. But that's just me.
Well, if you could pick one thing, either if it's cryptozoology, if it's paranormal, if it's anything that you're in 100% belief of, that you think that you
Okay.
from your research, anything, and then I also want to hear one thing that you're like, I can't get down with.
Well, I would say, I mean, for me, when I absolutely I guess maybe like two things that I absolutely believe in. The first, I do believe that there was a race of giants on in the past. Secondly, as far as like cryptozoology type things go, I'm not going to say I'm 100%, but I I really do believe, as far as I'll put it like this: if there is, these large undiscovered creatures out there, I think it's lake monsters have the biggest. I would say is the biggest probability that that they could be out there and could actually exist as an undiscovered creature like Bigfoot. I'm kind of on the fence about, I kind of a lot of times lean toward maybe it being something more in the metaphysical type realm. But as far as lake monsters go, I mean, there's just like so much water, there's just so much water. There's just so many reports that, and they're fairly consistent of the, type of, creature, as far as the multi-humped appearance, the long neck, and and it's worldwide. And it just kind of leads me to believe that if there is something out there, if I got to pick one thing, out there, one animal, that's it right there for me.
I think I'm in the same boat with you, no pun intended on that one, is that I'm a Kraken fanatic. I think that Krakens are 100%. And I've actually had a squid biologist talk to me and explain to me why it's not what we think, but there might be something out there. And it's weird because when you start getting into the Kraken territory, then people start bringing up that it might be from another planet because octopuses are kind of like theorized to be from a different planet because there's no other animal that we've discovered. I'm like, man, the ocean is so vast and we have discovered very
Yeah.
little of it compared to we're going into space rather than not than focusing in on our oceans or trying to find something deeper down in there. Where I wonder if there might be a sunken city. I don't know if it's like mermaids running around and stuff, but I think it might just be something that we might have lost or something might have shifted and fallen into the ocean. Where I'm like, that could be a high possibility. I mean, to say that there's not a lake monster, even though they've scavenged wherever Nessie was reported and they've looked around and ruled it out to be a hoax. I'm like, I don't know, man. There's got to be some animals that we have not discovered yet. If there's cryptozoology, I think is like there's 9.6 billion different species out there, and then there's like 6 point something that's only been discovered, and there's only a certain amount left that they haven't discovered. I'm like, there's still a vast amount that we don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
When we say species, there's like insects with there's a mosquito and there's a mosquito with a slightly different wingspan, and then that's a different species, and then it's like that's how there's so many of them, is there's always variance. And we've not gone to the deepest parts of the ocean to understand what the bloop is, which is that random sound that just goes off. So I'm like, come on. I mean, if there's a megalodon down there, I don't want people searching and waking that thing up, but I'm hoping to God if there's a crack and it can stop it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, and there's so much water, and the oceans. There's places that are so deep, and like you're saying that there's so many undiscovered things. I want to say I was doing a little bit of research for a book I wrote, about the water monsters down in South and Central America, and I want to say that at the time, at least, they were averaging, like, scientists were averaging maybe like around two species a day in the Amazon alone, that they were discovering, and
It's
usually
it's like
go ahead.
2000 something. It's not two. There's 2000 species that was being discovered, I think, on a total of like a month basis for a long period of time, and then now it's dwindled down to like I think maybe 100 that's discovered every month. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's billion. I think it was million I meant to say. But there's so many stuff out there where I'm like, you can't to say that there isn't. I'm like, that's just not in my there's that means you have a definitive answer. And I'm like, I don't even think we have all the we don't even know the facts in our
Yeah.
government, let alone the earth.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, and like with these undiscovered species, I mean, usually, it's it's like an insect or some variation of a little tiny frog or something like that. But I can think of one that I think this was in 2017 in the Solomon Islands. Scientists discovered it's like this really large rat, like I think it's like 4 pounds or something, like just this really big rodent, and like cracks these big nuts with its teeth, and the locals on the island, had always talked about these things existing and stuff, and scientists finally were able to confirm it, and that just kind of showed me that a lot of these eyewitness reports, or things that have been embedded in the indigenous tales, various places. There's something to some of these stories, and while they a lot of times it might sound outlandish, we just don't really know what's out there. We just, even, I mean, even, you just think about the, even in the eastern United States, I mean, there's just so much, there's so much land, and in the national forests and national parks, things like that. There's a lot of back country, and people, really seldom venture off of the trails and things like that. And there's just so much out there, and so much that we don't know about. And I just don't really rule a whole lot of things out.
Yeah, that's a weird thing about trails because I'm guessing you're in a campground because I'm seeing a fire in the back out your window, and I'm hoping
Oh
that there's
yeah,
just not.
yeah.
Okay.
I live in an RV, so yeah,
I'm a
I'm
big camping guy because I used to camp
okay.
from like till I
Yeah,
was like 17 years old. I did it like every single
yeah,
weekend. It's
yeah. Somebody.
nothing, dude. Nothing beats when you're cooking food and you wrap it in tinfoil and put it on a campfire and it just soaks it. It's great. But when it comes to like trails, for instance, there's always that carved out path that you can walk. But you start to notice if you're the type of person that doesn't follow that path and you go off to it, you go off on your own and you go exploring without being on the trail, you start to realize that they put up boundaries that you don't get to see when you're on the trail. When you start to go and really explore of how really confined you really are, which I start to
Hmm.
look at like, I don't know if it comes from government testing, if it comes from something where they're creating or cloning or doing whatever the hell they got to do, or if they captured whatever could be out there and maybe put it away. But it makes me really speculate and just wonder, just have an open mind on the aspect of like, there's got to be something out there. Like I know there was, I don't know if this was, oh man, I want to say like 50 something years ago, but there used to be an undocumented amount of unknown islands out there. And one happened to be a CIA test site where they used to launch bombs at. And they said that the animals on this island would just be like morphed and changed in different ways, reptiles that were bigger than what they were supposed to be. And nobody was allowed to go to that island on an aspect of it was like a CIA test or some type of secret government testing site. And I'm like, man, to think if one of those things that might, I don't know. Why do we have the reason we have a donkey and a horse when they breed? It's a mule. You can't breed another mule with another mule because their sperm is infertile. So to keep creating mules, you have a donkey and a horse. So I'm like, to think if there isn't just like a random thing out there that might have the stripes of an animal like a cheetah and it might be mixed with a reptile. I'm like, to say that it doesn't happen, come on.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be, that could represent, some of your outlandish reports, right? Somebody, I mean, I read this one report on this site a while back, and it was a guy that claimed, swore he saw like a Tasmanian tiger, they're extinct. I think they went extinct in the 30s in Australia, but he claimed to see something that looked just like, same size, same stripes, everything, a Tasmanian tiger, and this was in Tennessee. So I mean, is that something like you're talking about there? Some weirdo thing that escaped or something, and you have along those lines. I mean, it's shocking, the more you read up on these kind of weird sightings and things, it is shocking how many animals escape. You know, for instance, in the US, like how many kangaroos are found, and sometimes they don't even know like where they came from or who had them. Just this all kinds of weird exotic animals that people have and escape. I mean, it just happens all the time. It's so you never know how these kind of things account for weird sightings.
There was just a random in some random town, there was 42 zebras that were just running around because they escaped from some enclosure. And I'm like,
Yeah, up in Maryland, I think.
yeah, so I'm like, and that's where I'm from. So I'm looking around like, look, I don't like China created a chimera, which is like a mix of like a bunch of different animals formed into one. They ended up killing it, but I'm like, to think that they just like we cloned a sheep in what, 96? And I'm like, to think that we
Mhm.
just stopped at that one thing and we're not doing it without telling everybody we're doing it. I'm like, maybe that might account for a lot of random things and plus things that happen in nature. We have you can mix a chihuahua with a wolf that if you see what that thing looks like, it doesn't look normal. And I'm like, that's probably what can happen out there in nature. There's animals that are probably doing something that, and here's the thing about Bigfoot. I think Bigfoot existed, but I don't think it's around anymore. It's much like Neanderthals used to exist and then they went
Mhm.
extinct. There used to be a thing called what is the name of the Bigfoot species? Like Australopithecus or something like that. Used to exist a long time ago, and it used to be. And this is how with Bigfoot, the Yeti, all these places that account of a Bigfoot or a Yeti. Now, the Yeti is supposed to be like in the Tibetan mountains. Bigfoot is supposed to be over here in like North America. there's accounts that are written into their history of a species with the same exact features, just different characteristics, but the same exact body styles, the same exact gorilla-like structure. And that was before cell phone, that was before messenger pigeon, that was before any of that. So to think that they randomly both just, we talk about the metaphysical, smoked the same peyote pipe, and then we're able to see this nature guide or this spirit guide as Bigfoot, I don't know about that. I think it had to be a real thing that might not exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's possible. I mean, do you think it I've heard a lot of people speculate that kind of the same thing, that it's something that used to exist, but now what you're seeing is more like a ghost of it or something. I mean, if we can see ghosts of people, or there's ghost dogs, ghost horses, things like that. I mean, supposedly there are, couldn't this be kind of something like that?
I'm more in belief of the paranormal than I think, because I have friends that have been on my show a bunch of times that are paranormal team investigators, and I used to be like, okay, paranormal, like I could do stuff like deja vu and stuff I can't really explain. It's weird parts of our brain, obviously. But when I saw one of their live videos of them like talking into a spirit box and being able to communicate, and this thing was actually answering back, I actually got goosebumps. I was like, oh fuck, like I didn't even think about animals having like a ghost or something like that. But I started to look deeper into it, and I'm like, I think that's what you're seeing is weird happening now, is that the paranormal stuff, the documentaries about it now, like Skinwalker Ranch, these are actually legit, thorough investigations of stuff where they're not making fun of it. Like, a dude got radiation poisoning in one of them because Skinwalker Ranch has certain parts where there's high radiation levels and it's like
Mm-hmm.
very toxic. And I mean, we're seeing stuff about Chernobyl. There's wolves in Chernobyl that have like, they're basically nuclear. They're like covered in radiation, their hair's falling out, their eyes glow a weird color because of the fucking radiation down there. I'm like, look, man, that stuff's being looked into more. I think more people are going to start doing more serious, independent, like Bobcat Goldthwait.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he's a big Bigfoot fanatic. He made a movie
I didn't
about it
know
and
that.
everything like that. So he's
Yeah,
a
okay.
he like is 100% that it's Bigfoot's real. He's seen it, all this type of stuff. Listening to him explain it, you're hearing him talk and bring up so many facts. You're like, oh shit, like I need to do research? Like, is this like he's listing off a bunch of sources and stuff? I'll have to send you the podcast I heard him on. But I was listening to it, I was like, damn it, like if this is real, like you're gonna get me, I might lose all my savings in my bank account trying to find this fucking thing.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear a lot of convincing stuff like that. People. I mean, that you would never expect from all walks of life. A lot of times, claim to see one of these things, but it's I just get really torn on it sometimes because of you would expect to see them right in out in the Pacific Northwest and these real wilderness areas up in Canada, things like that. But you get reports from everywhere, man. I mean, like I've heard reports from like Fairfax County, Virginia, right next to DC, up like in
Bigfoot was
Connecticut, not
storming the
even that.
Capitol. You didn't see.
You and like in places you just wouldn't expect, out around I've read a couple from out like around Yuma, Arizona. I mean, and I was out there back in February, and I mean, you're lucky to even see a jackrabbit when you go out there. I mean, it's just like so desolate, and there's I just don't even know what a Bigfoot would eat out there, but you just get these sightings from everywhere. So it's just a big mystery to me. I mean, you get so many sightings from so many places, and the thing that always kind of puzzles me about it is it would just seem, as many reports from all over the place, that these things are, there would have to just be a large population of them. But at the same time, like any kind of definitive evidence, physical evidence, it's or even really a really good video evidence even, is just so hard to come by. It's just a real mystery to me. I don't know what to say.
Do you think that real clear evidence would be something that would change it for the good or bad? Because I'm looking at it in like two ways here, where I'm like, if Bigfoot they found a body of Bigfoot, and then people started believing it was real. Then we'd have a bunch of people probably tearing up the nature land trying to look for it and try and find their own piece of Bigfoot. Or it would be a bunch of people that had confirmation that, like, hey, there's things out there we need to still explore into this world. It's just very hard because people are so different. And I think right now, the only kind of benefit that's kind of coming out without any of this being found is that there's a bunch of stories and accounts that might not be proven, but there's just a lot of people interested. And you're seeing a real massive creativity for the good and bad. Like, the good creativity is that people can really use their creativity and skills to make shows about it, make books about it, make movies about it, do whatever. And then there's people that want to kind of bleed it dry, which kind of sucks. Like, I'm not a fan of Roswell, New Mexico, really making their whole McDonald's the shape of a UFO. I'm like, all right, I get it. You're trying to make a buck, but you're also making people that aren't they have a toe in it. Like me, I would say I'm up to my ankle in the type of talk about this. But there are people that are like, what is that about Bigfoot? And they hear someone start going, they go, I can't do that, I got a car payment, and then they walk off because it's too much for them to be able to handle. And it's hard
Yeah.
when you get this information. Like when I started studying government projects and Alex Jones style things, I turned into an Alex Jones. I was losing my shit. I was like, oh my God, they're lying to us. But that's what happens because it's so much information that your brain has known so much for so long that now it's basically asking that I'm going to reverse everything that you just learned and show you that there's more out there than what you think or what we've discovered. Because right now, I think a lot of people think everything that we've discovered, there's not much left. And I'm like, there's a lot more left.
Oh yeah, yeah, and if anybody did find any, and we're talking definitive, like you said, like a body or something, evidence of Bigfoot. I mean, it would definitely be a double-edged sword, I think. I mean, in one way, I mean, I think it would be good because, yeah, okay, then, maybe, you could get actual funding, right? Or grants or something to study, to find, more of these populations. You might be able to, get some grants and funding, to study lake monsters. But along with that, what you're going to get, then you're going to have the gatekeepers. It's going to be the academic community is going to come in, and a lot of people are kind of clamoring for this, because above all they want like scientific acceptance for UFOs or cryptozoology or whatever. And I kind of caution people about that, because then you're going to have gatekeepers. You're going to have these official gatekeepers, controlling the flow of information. They're going to have all the funding. They might then have large sections of forests kind of blocked off because they're on a government funded type of hunt for these things. And I think anytime you get these gatekeepers, I'm all about free flow of information, good, bad, indifferent. And I just I don't like gatekeepers. And if you have that, that's not going to be good. Number two, I mean, if you prove, if you prove that Bigfoot exists, definitively, like we talked about, well, I mean, the fun's kind of over. I mean, like,
Yeah.
the thing that I like about all this is the mystery of it. So, I mean, I probably it doesn't want to see it solved, and that's anathema, to a lot of folks. But to me, I just really enjoy the mystery of it all. And if you can prove, if somebody proves that it exists, well, that mystery's gone. Now, I mean, I think it would be a good thing, and you could probably get protections enacted, for these creatures. And that's what a lot of people say, is they want protection and legislation to protect Bigfoot or protect lake monsters. But then on the other hand, do you really need protections, right? Because I mean, if we've not been able to find a Bigfoot body, I think they're doing all right on their own, you know.
Yeah. I also look at it like if you really think that like drilling into the ocean, if it was going to affect a lake monster's area, you think it wouldn't defend itself? You really think that a giant kraken wouldn't just take a tentacle and slap you? But that's what I like too, is the mystery aspect of stuff. Even though I've talked to a squid biologist who was like here, and I'm kind of on the, I like the science aspect of it too. But at the same time, man, the mystery in the stories in the folklore, these are things that have been brought upon for generations upon generations. Bigfoot stories now might be Bigfoot stories about how we hear someone talk about seeing Bigfoot or coming across it at a campground, Yellowstone, whatever. But they've been told throughout generations upon generations. This isn't like, it's just taken different names and different forms. I mean, we have religious texts that get passed down to where we have today. But if you look at every single story that's been passed down, every single biblical reference, everything, that's kind of the whole point and the fun of it all as well too, is not knowing that, you know, all these types of things, but having a faith and belief in it, which makes you kind of like hope for something in a way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally. I mean, you know, it as far as these things go, I mean, whether it be, you know, these cryptids or ghosts or, you know, certain government conspiracies. I mean, to me, just not knowing, not being able to prove it, you know, but feeling like there's so much anecdotal evidence there that there has to be something to it, right? That's why I'm drawn to things like that. And yeah, I guess really you know, maybe if you did prove some of these things, you know, it might kind of ruin it. But, you know, I don't think we're really in any danger of that, you know, because let's face it, I mean, after as many people as are out in the woods looking for Bigfoot, I mean, still the best video that there is the Patterson Gimlin video, and that's what 50 couple years old or thereabouts. Um, I you know you've got some, you know, you got some good tracks, some inconclusive hair, and really, I mean, as many people as out there and as much attention as there is, that's about all you've got. And you know, as far as some of these other cryptids, you know, you have even less. So I mean, I think the mystery is always going to be there. You know, like as far as things like ghosts go, I don't know how anybody would ever really prove that one way or another. And even if you did kind of conclusively prove that something's going on, I don't know how you would prove exactly, you know, like what a ghost is, you know. So I mean, I think there's never going to be a lack of mystery out there for us.
I think the interesting thing with the UFO stuff is either, my thoughts on it is that it's something from like a government technology that they haven't released to us yet, because they're always like 50 years in front of us. But I think it's something like that. But when I hear the UFO stories or the encounters of people being abducted and they're like really
Mhm.
spacey and it seems like it's fake or they're lying, I look at it like this is exactly what someone does when their brain's trying to compartmentalize something that in words that are in our everyday speech that they can't really correlate with what they saw, because there's probably not any words for what they saw. Now, I've had three guests, probably over a year in between each other, that have given me the same exact story of their own personal encounter. One guy who spent like, I think it was like 12 years in Alaska, another guy that saw it in California, and then another dude that worked on an oil rig back in like 1998. And they talk about these three lights in the sky. And I'm like, man, that's three people that don't know each other, that have no interaction with each other, that I've talked to, that have just tossed that story out and explained the exact same thing. So I'm in the boat of like, there's definitely something we can't explain. But with all this UFO stuff, I'm just hoping it gets more people to be interested in our government, because when people start rattling off the UFO stuff, they start talking about a lot of government shit. I'm like, bruh, this is letting people know that there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't even know about yet. Like, you think they don't know how to brainwash? That's a lie.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it, you know, where it really needs to go. But you know, I'm kind of torn on it because, you know, with the UFO stuff and all of, you know, this stuff that's come out lately, and the government essentially admitting that, oh yeah, you know, we've been looking at this stuff for a while. But then you've got people in the UFO community, they're like, oh, we're on the brink of disclosure. And it's like, okay, let me get this straight. So, for the last 30 years, you've been talking about how the government's hiding everything, and and now the government, essentially admits something, and you think that we're on the brink of disclosure. So you're actually gonna trust, what they're getting ready to disclose. I mean, whatever they're admitting to, I don't, I'm kind of skeptical of, if it's some kind of maybe misinformation, or if it's, hey, look over here. But what you really need to be focused on is actually over there. You look at the timing of the, you've always, and when they do let something out like that, you've always got to look at the timing, right? So I've always said, like, look, guys, if the government ever admits that there are extraterrestrials or something like that behind some of this, you better watch out, because they're trying to distract you from something really nefarious that they're either doing or about to do.
When did they release the
That's
UAP
kind
thing?
of
That
where
there's
I'm at with the whole stuff.
when they released the
Yeah,
UAP thing.
what were they trying to?
Well, I was saying
Yeah,
when they
it's like, what were they really trying to get your mind off of?
well, during the pandemic, when the whole thing was happening, they threw out the UAP thing like it was nothing, and then nobody paid attention to that because everybody was more worried about getting toilet paper and shit. And I'm like, look, they're gonna release.
Yeah.
It took them. First of all, I might have the unpopular opinion in this, but I just want to know what the fuck happened to JFK. That's it. I understand he was assassinated, but there's a lot of shit where I'm like, hey man, can somebody look into this better? Because if there's still 50 unclosed documents that haven't been released to us, I might have the unpopular opinion in that. But when I look at like the UAP stuff or the UFO stuff, they're always releasing something. But then when you look at it, everything's so redacted and it's so like backwards, and it's very, very
Yeah.
hard to. I'm like, can you just give a clear answer? If there's stuff you can't explain out there, a ship technology, you're hiding something. And then that's when the UFO Twitter, where I have an issue with, is that there are people that are generally interested into the fun of it, which I fucking love. But then there's the people that act like they have that definitive answer. And I'm like, man,
Yeah.
you can't. They haven't even, nobody has one yet. I don't even know if, we don't even know if if the earth's not flat. There's been people going up into space, but damn it. I've talked to so many friends of mine that are flat earthers, and I'm like, oh my God, they bring up so many points. I'm just like, I can't even do this.
Yeah, it's yeah, you're right. I mean, there's just a lot of weird questions out there for this stuff. And it just, I would just caution people. I mean, when the government's releasing these videos or this or that, I mean, I wouldn't get too wound up over it one way or the other. I mean, they're essentially not ever going to tell you anything. Is my point. Or if they do, it's going to be to distract you, there's good, nothing good is going to come out of anything that they release or whatever. You got these people. I mean, I remember before the government released that report here recently, about the UAPs, and like, just like, I knew all these people that, I mean, they were just on the edge of their seat, and then they read it and like, oh yeah, that's a big nothing burger. It's like, well, what did you expect? It's just kind of like what I was, where have you been,
Well, it's kind of like we get right to the precipice and then they kind of get distracted by something. 2 years ago, around this time, there was people trying to storm Area 51. That was a big thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
that just died off. And it's like we always,
Yeah.
and every single thing that happens in this world is like whatever riot or protest, whatever, we get like right to the doorstep of something happening, and then we get distracted by something and then go right back to the beginning. And it all just keeps repeating over and over again. I'm like, look, man, I'm going to quote Ron White on this one when it's about life. It's kind of like when you're waiting in line for like 3 hours for a roller coaster, and that cart finally pulls up because you're at the front of the line. You see it, and it's got holes in the seat, and it's all rickety and rusty and shit. And you just go, fuck it, I'm riding it anyway. And you hop in it, and you just throw your hands up and scream when the loop de loop comes.
That's a good analogy. Oh man.
But Denver, look, man, you've given me enough of your time. I'd love to have you back on again, man. But is there a place where people can find you at, your books, for instance, on Amazon, and then your site as well, too?
Yeah, the best place, for my books, just go to Amazon, just look up, just search Denver Michaels on Amazon. All my books are there. You can get them all there. Some of them you can get at Barnes and Noble and places like that too. My website, denvermichaels.net. I have a blog, and I put something out usually at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. I'm most social media. I'm most active on Twitter, underscore Denver Michaels. I also have a Facebook page, author Denver Michaels, but Twitter's really the place to go if you want to interact with me.
Well, I'll make sure I link it all in the description. And thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.